I am John Moses with the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. I am the emerald ash borer technical assistance coordinator, so I am in charge of tracking the spread of emerald ash borer throughout the state of Minnesota, and in charge of the regulations associated with the emerald ash borer quarantine that goes into place when it's found in new counties in the state. With us for this meeting is my colleague Patrick Walrath. He will be entering some of the outreach documents that I'll be talking about into the chat with links to those if you're interested in those. And like I mentioned, please, if you have questions, just put them in the chat and we'll address them as we can as we go through the presentation. I will talk for about 45 minutes, and then we'll have time for more questions and answers at the end. And so with that, I'm going to get started. And just again, thanks for being here. We're having this meeting due to the recent find of emerald ash borer in Todd County, Minnesota. So it was found in the southeastern part of the county, but as I'll show in a little bit here, it's on the border of other parts of the county as well. So I will get moving here. And that's my contact information. If you ever have questions, please feel free to reach out through email or phone call. Happy to answer direct questions as well. Here's kind of what's on the agenda for this presentation. I'm going to go through the life cycle of the insect, the host trees that it attacks, how to recognize symptoms and identify emerald ash borer, what symptoms you want to look for early on in a tree to identify if emerald ash borer might be causing issues. And then the known distribution in the state, kind of where you can always go to check to see where we know it is and where we don't know it is. So if you have something to potentially report, and then we'll go through the regulations associated with it. So with emerald ash borer, we still have basically emerald ash borer quarantine, which is now pretty large, with 60 counties in the state being included within that quarantine. And that just limits the movement of any ash material and mulch and hardwood firewood. Then I will touch on management, kind of the options that you have at kind of the individual tree level. These are more like landscape management options. I will refer you to other resources if you are doing kind of large-scale forest management. And then lastly, I'll touch on the best way to report a potential infestation. So with that, I'm going to get started on the life cycle. And for those that just joined, thank you for attending the meeting today. I am recording this, and so we will put this up on MDA's YouTube channel in the next couple of days after this meeting for people to be able to access. And so just a little bit of background on emerald ash borer itself. It's a metallic wood-boring beetle. So it attacks ash trees as its main host for reproducing. Its native range is northeastern Asia, so parts of China, the Russian Far East, Japan, and North and South Korea, and Taiwan. That's where it originally came from. It likely arrived sometime in the mid-90s in the Detroit, Michigan, and Windsor, Ontario area. And so this, it likely arrived via solid wood packaging material into the ports there. So it's kind of, goods are going everywhere. So it likely arrived then, and it wasn't identified until 2002 when it was finally identified in Detroit, Michigan, after there were kind of already, thousands of trees that were declining and showing signs of some sort of insect infestation or disease. And so at that point, 2002 was identified, and that kind of kicked off the rapid spread of this insect throughout North America. So at that point, it had been present for a number of years, and lots of infested ash nursery stock and firewood and things like that moved out from that original infestation area and into a lot more states, kind of kicking off that rapid spread. And so it was 2009 when it was first found in Minnesota in the South St. Anthony neighborhood of St. Paul. And now it's about 17 years later that we have found it in Todd County. So it's an insect pest that's going to continue to move. Our native ash don't have any, host resistance to this insect, unfortunately. So when it gets into an area, it can be very devastating. So that's kind of the background of how emerald ash borer got here. So where we sit now is we have now 60 counties out of 87 counties in Minnesota that have known emerald ash borer infestations. And so the life cycle of this insect, so it's important to understand how the biology of this insect works to get a better idea of how you have to deal with it and why certain things like moving firewood can be such an issue. So we get initial adult beetle emergence in the late spring or early summer. It kind of depends on where you are in the state and how quickly things heat up in the spring. So we track emergence using degree day modeling. So basically, it begins emergence at 450 growing degree days with a base temperature 50, which doesn't really matter for everyone's purposes here. But essentially, in central Minnesota, we typically get to beetle emergence around the beginning of June. So the beetles are going to start emerging from ash trees here pretty soon. And then once they emerge, they do a little bit of maturation feeding in the canopy of the tree. So this is nothing obvious that you'd see. They nibble on the leaves for a few days. It's not like Japanese beetle that skeletonizes a leaf. It's nothing you'd notice in the canopy of the tree. They do that maturation feeding for a couple days. Then they mate. And then the females begin laying the eggs in the bark cracks and crevices in the canopy of the tree. So an average female beetle can lay between 60 and 90 eggs. So you can see how that population starts to build pretty rapidly. And so they begin laying their eggs in the mid to upper canopy of a tree and kind of work their way down. So infestations always begin in that mid to upper canopy and work their way down the tree as it progresses over the years. And so they typically choose the south-southwest facing side of the tree to lay their eggs on first. So the side of the tree that gets the most amount of direct sunlight. And they typically lay them on branches kind of in that, 2 to 4 inch diameter range where that bark transitions from smooth to rough. So that's usually where we get initial egg laying. And so once those eggs are laid, within a week or two, they hatch. And then the larva burrows through the bark there into the cambium layer under there, like in that initial layer of the sapwood. And that's what does the damage to the tree. So it's that larval feeding, and they do that tunneling, and they create these serpentine-like galleries that cut off the transport of water and nutrients between the root system and the crown. And so those larvae go through what we call larval instars, and they have 4 larval instar stages, which is basically just growing sizes. They go through those 4 larval instars and then chew a pupal chamber, as you can see in that center picture, about a 1/4 inch into the sapwood, or on really large mature trees, they will create that pupal chamber in the bark as well. And so at that point, they've done the damage that they're going to do to the tree's vascular system. They fold over into what we call a J larva, as you can see in that center picture. And then the next spring and summer, when it heats up again, they will pupate and turn into the adult beetle and start that process all over again. And so what I described to you there is a 1-year life cycle. In Minnesota, we have both a 1-year and a 2-year life cycle. So that can be important just to give you an idea of how that works. So an emerald ash borer egg that was laid in the summer of 2025, it hatched. The larva began tunneling underneath the bark there. It didn't make it all the way to the pupal chamber, so it didn't make it through all its larval instar stages. It overwintered as an immature larva. So this spring and summer, as it heats up, the larva will continue its development and its tunneling until it makes its way to its pupal chamber. It will overwinter a second time, and in the summer of 2027 emerge as an adult beetle. So that just means you can have any immature larval stage of emerald ash borer underneath the bark at any time of year. So we have both that 1-year and 2-year life cycle. And the further north you go, the more you get the 2-year life cycle. In the Twin Cities metro area, it's about 40 to 50% of the larvae are on a 2-year life cycle. And as you get further up into Todd County and further north, it's going to increase for the amount that are in that 2-year life cycle. All right, so that's it for how emerald ash borer works. I will mention that the adult beetle itself isn't super long-lived. They on average live a little over 30 days. And it's the larva that does the damage to the tree, not the adult beetle itself. They are decent flyers. They can fly up to, I believe, 5 or 6 kilometers, but they can also hitch rides on things. Many of them will reinfest the same tree that they emerged from or a tree within 100 meters from them. But a small percentage of that population does strike out longer distances and can fly several miles or get transported via human-assisted means to a further location. So you do get these kind of scattershot spread, and eventually it kind of all coalesces into one large infestation. All right, as I kind of mentioned before, how emerald ash borer actually kills a tree. It's the larvae tunneling underneath the bark that actually does the damage to the tree. So what you can see is a picture on the left there is an emerald ash borer gallery. It has that distinct S-shaped tunneling, that serpentine pattern that emerald ash borer makes in ash trees. And so a tree can withstand, a couple of emerald ash borer attacking it. It's really once you have hundreds or even thousands of emerald ash borer building up in a tree that it kills the tree and overwhelms the tree and it basically girdles it. So like I mentioned, emerald ash borer starts its infestation on the top of the tree and works its way down. They really use up all that living phloem layer and are very efficient at producing as many beetles per tree as possible. So you can see it's really the number of emerald ash borer larvae that build up in a tree that eventually kill it, essentially feeding on that cambium layer and girdling the tree until it's dead and it cannot transport water nutrients between the root system and the crown. And so the real issue with this is that the populations grow slowly at first. So when it's first found in an area, you see a few trees here from year to year. But with each female beetle being able to lay between 60 and 90 eggs, that population can really jump quite fast. So you get this little bit of a couple year lag time between when emerald ash borer populations start growing in an area to when they really take off. And then once those populations explode, you have a lot of tree mortality within a relatively short period of time. And so what we've seen in most communities, it typically takes around 12 years after emerald ash borer is introduced to kill the majority of the mature ash trees in the landscape. And that can really be harmful to places like cities that have to manage a large number of trees on public property and right of way. And it can go pretty quick. So you can see it goes slowly at first, but you hit that exponential growth and you have a lot of trees dying within about a 5, 6, 7 year period. And that can really overwhelm a community's resources to deal with all the hazardous trees on the landscape. So you want to act. You want to begin acting as soon as you know it. You want to, ideally, if your community dealing with this, you want to do some planning before it arrives. But basically, once it's there, you need to start acting and stay on top of things and plan for increased removals over the near future. Right. So the host trees for this insect, like in its name, ash. It's all true ash trees. So anything in the Fraxinus species. And so ash trees have opposite branching. They have compound leaves and 5 to many leaflets. In Minnesota, and additionally, they have kind of that diamond ridged bark, as you can see in these pictures. And you'll see in that picture on the right, there's these green bands. A number of communities will wrap their ash trees with these green bands with some like websites or phone number information so that people can see on the landscape what an ash tree looks like. And so they may recognize like, oh, I have that in my yard as well. It's just to try to bring attention to the issue. But if you have any questions about ash trees, there are helpful guides for being able to identify them if you're not unsure how to do so. In Minnesota, we have 3 types of ash that are native. We have black ash, green ash, and white ash. And unfortunately, they are all highly susceptible to emerald ash borer, with black ash and green ash being the most susceptible. And that is typically what you'll be dealing with in your yards and your forests. So green ash is found throughout the entire state. It is found oftentimes as a boulevard tree or in parks or as shelter belts. It is the most common one planted and found throughout the entire state. Many trees that that came down due to Dutch elm disease were replaced with green ash, unfortunately, and now we kind of find ourselves in a similar situation. We also have lots of black ash, especially in north central Minnesota and those more lowland, very wet areas. We have huge swaths of black ash forest where that is really the only tree within that forest ecosystem. And then we have some more upland areas and pockets of white ash, eastern part of the state, but that is sometimes planted as a yard tree as well. Like I said, they all are highly susceptible, and the mortality rate, unfortunately, is about 99% for our native ash trees. There are some alternative host trees that emerald ash borer can complete its life cycle in, but are not native to Minnesota. There's the white fringe tree, which is in the same family, the olive family, as ash trees, where EAB can reproduce. That is a shrub that is native to kind of the southeast and mid-Atlantic states, but you can buy it at nursery locations, and we just recommend that you probably don't choose that tree to replant with in your yard. And then also cultivated olive has been found that emerald ash borer can reproduce as well, which is not an issue for Minnesota, but it will be an issue for people in California. So those are the host trees, and so it is pretty much just ash that it impacts, and all our trees are highly susceptible to it. So the best way to recognize emerald ash borer, there's really 4 types of ways to identify it. The most common way to identify if you have emerald ash borer in your tree is by finding that S-shaped feeding gallery. So that's the tunneling pattern that the larva makes underneath the bark there. And oftentimes you'll have a split in the bark, or as it becomes really infested, that bark will start to fall off, or you'll have woodpeckers going after the larvae under the bark that knock off enough of the bark to where you can see that S-shaped feeding pattern. That is distinct for emerald ash borer if you find it in an ash tree. So if you find that S-shaped tunneling pattern in an ash tree, you know it's emerald ash borer. Next is the emerald ash borer larva itself. So what's distinct about this, you can see that red circle around the tail end of the larva. They have these 2 little spine-like projections on the tail end. Those are the technical term for that is the urogompi, but they're just 2 little black pincers at the tail end of the larva. So if you find an insect larva in an ash tree, as you're chopping it up for firewood or something like that, and it has those 2 little black pincers at the tail end, you know it's emerald ash borer. We have other native insects that have 1 of those or none of them, but if it has 2 of them and you pulled it out of an ash tree, you know it's emerald ash borer. Next is the adult beetle itself. So occasionally you will see the adult beetle, but it is pretty rare. They're usually up in the canopy of the tree. And most commonly when we get adult beetle reports to us at the MDA, typically they are of the 6-spotted tiger beetle, which is a ground nesting beetle that got that bright green color. But the emerald ash borer adult beetle is distinct in several ways. So it's about a 1/2 inch long by about an 1/8 inch wide, and it has those bright iridescent green wing covers and that kind of magenta colored abdomen. So it is a very distinct looking beetle, but like I mentioned, it's often up in the canopy of the tree. It's typically not at eye level until emerald ash borer is really blowing up in an area and is widespread. And, you know, oftentimes when people are treating their trees with insecticide, they may find dead beetles at the base of the tree. So, which is a good sign that that treatment is working. And lastly is the D-shaped exit hole. So yes, they do leave the D-shaped exit hole when they exit a tree. But like I mentioned, with the size of the beetle, they're only about an 1/8 inch wide. So that is like looking for a needle in a haystack on a mature tree with thick bark. If you'll be able to find that S-shaped feeding gallery typically far before you can find one of those D-shaped exit holes, because like I mentioned, emerald ash borer starts in the upper parts of the tree and works its way down. If you can see exit holes at eye level, you are likely dealing with a very heavily infested tree. That should be obvious that something's going on. We also have other insects that leave oval-shaped holes and things like that. So if you do find a D-shaped exit hole and you have permission, I would recommend removing that bark off to look for that S-shaped tunneling pattern on the surface of the wood beneath that. All right, so those are the 4 ways to confirm emerald ash borer. And here's just kind of our outreach sheet of insects that are commonly confused. So you can see emerald ash borer circled up there in the top left. And like I mentioned before, the most common one we get that's they're already starting to come in for the year is the six-spotted tiger beetle. It's that, if you looking at it on this, they have a very different body shape. But when you see it run on your deck or sidewalk really quickly away, and it's this bright green bug, that's oftentimes what people see and get confused and report it. So uh, these are just a mix of all the different types of bugs that we commonly get reported to us that are similar to that. And yes, even cicadas get reported. All right. So signs and symptoms. This is what you want to look for in your yard, on your property, for to see if emerald ash borer might be impacting the tree. This is what we use when we go out and do visual survey. Um, we are really dependent on woodpeckers kind of showing where emerald ash borer is in the area, because once they find that food source, they can really go to town and help illuminate kind of where trees are being impacted. And so, how I mentioned emerald ash borer usually starts in the mid to upper canopy in those branches between 2 to 6 inches in diameter, where that bark transitions from smooth to rough. Oftentimes, woodpeckers will go after those larvae underneath the bark, and they will do what we call, they'll slough off or flake off some of that bark, and it's what we call blonding. And so you'll see these blonde patches on branches in the mid to upper canopy. And then within those blonded areas, you're going to find these shallow, dime-sized, kind of light-colored woodpeck holes. So just like in that picture on the right, they're going just deep enough to get to that larva underneath the bark. So they're not going deep into the wood like they will with some other insects. It's just these shallow, small, like dime-sized woodpecks. And so we look for the blonding, and then within those blonded areas, we look for these dime-sized, shallow woodpeck holes to look to see if it's likely emerald ash borer that's impacting it. And if you have a good pair of binoculars, oftentimes woodpeckers will knock off enough of that bark in a location where you can actually see part of that S shape, that serpentine feeding gallery, which is enough to confirm a tree. So when you start to look at a number of these, it really starts to stand out. Oftentimes with some of our native insects, it'll only be on the trunk of the tree or right below, like a dead or broken limb. And oftentimes some of our native insects will go deeper into the wood. And so you get kind of a shadow. You don't have that light color pecking. And like I mentioned, emerald ash borer starts in the mid to upper canopy and works its way down. If it's emerald ash borer, you should have damage in the canopy of the tree if you're also seeing damage on the trunk of the tree. All right, some more examples of this woodpecker damage. You can just, in that image on the left, it's green ash. You can really see that blonding, and then within those blonded areas, you can see those shallow woodpecks. In the image in the center, that is of a black ash tree in Duluth. That blonding doesn't necessarily stand out quite as much, just due to the somewhat different color of the bark of a black ash tree, but the same rules still apply. And then image on the right is a green ash tree in a park that's heavily infested, where you're seeing woodpecker damage all the way down the trunk of the tree, and you can see where some bark has been ripped off, and you have those S-shaped galleries tunneled right there. Other things to look for that are a little bit more cryptic are the bark splits. So when a tree is initially infested, the tree will try to heal around that feeding gallery, and it'll build up callus tissue. And as that tree continues to grow, that bark that is above where that tunneling happened will separate from the wood and make a nice split. And oftentimes you can see that S-shaped tunneling pattern within those vertical bark splits. And then the image on the right is of another bark split that's a little less obvious. So they can come in different kind of shapes and sizes, but that is something else that you can look for early on. And then here's some more examples of those bark splits. That image on the left, you can see those vertical splits going up that main stem. You also see some of that blonding and a little bit of woodpecker damage in those areas as well. And then in the image on the right, so this one is much more discrete, but if you look at the very top center of the photo, you can actually see some of that tunneling pattern in part of a bark split right there that's visible in the top of that picture. So something you have to be looking very closely for. Additionally, with the bark splits and the woodpecker damage, there will be canopy thinning. So you are going to get, your tree's going to die from the top down. But overall, you get a thinner canopy when you start to see these impacts. So typically, in an otherwise healthy tree, before emerald ash borer starts attacking it, we see woodpecker damage show up before canopy damage is really visible. But once that canopy thinning starts, you see an overall thinning of the canopy. There's fewer leaves, there's smaller leaves, a lot more light penetrating through. And oftentimes you'll see what, like the image on the right, where you get that upper canopy that's very thin, and then you start to get a lot of like water sprouts or epicormic sprouting in the lower part of the canopy of the tree, trying to put out that energy and new growth, and it gets this real bushy appearance. So that's kind of a classic look of a declining tree due to emerald ash borer. And here is the general progression of symptoms. So this is on average. It can take a little bit longer if emerald ash borer populations are just getting started in an area and the population levels are pretty low, or it can go faster than this once emerald ash borer really takes a hold in the area and the population levels and the insect pressure is really high. But on average, it takes about 5 years to kill a tree from when it's initially infested to when the tree dies. But that can happen in as little as 3 to 4 years once emerald ash borer populations really blow up in an area. So in that first year of infestation, there's going to be no signs of any insect damage in the tree. You have small larvae present underneath the bark. The woodpeckers aren't really going to notice any sort of food source at this point. It's really in that second year of infestation when you have more emerald ash borer building up in that tree. You have some mature larvae present that the woodpeckers might find for a food source. Adults are emerging. At this point, if it was an otherwise healthy tree before being infested, you largely wouldn't see any canopy impacts yet at all. So the tree would still look perfectly healthy in the summertime. It's really in that third year of infestation. With each year, you have more emerald ash borer building up in that tree, where you're very likely to have woodpecking on several parts of branches throughout the mid canopy of the tree. You might see some bark splits. If you're very keyed in on canopy health, you likely start to see some thinning of the canopy at this point. But it's really the average homeowner, it's year 4 of infestation when they can really see those visible canopy impacts. You have lots of woodpecker damage on many of the branches throughout the canopy, and maybe starting to come onto the trunk of the tree to be at eye level. That's typically when people really see that there's something wrong with the tree. And then within the next year or two, that tree is going to be dead and gone. And so it's important to mention that ash trees dry out and become brittle and hazardous very quickly after they die. So if you can deal with a tree before it's completely dead, if it's in a location where if it were to fall over, it could damage property or potentially hurt someone, you want to deal with it before it's completely dead, because ash trees start to fail in very unpredictable ways once they're dead, just due to how quickly they dry out and start to drop limbs and can snap off in windstorms and things like that. It can also really increase the cost of removal if you have to hire someone and it's located in a hard to access location in your backyard or next to your garage or the side of the house. So you don't want to wait until that tree is completely dead if it's in a tough location that's going to require more equipment or expertise to be able to remove it. So that's something to keep in mind as you think about when you might want to deal with a tree. If it's in a natural area, it can be left to die and fall apart. But this is for trees in landscaped areas to cause damage to property. You want to deal with them before they're completely dead. All right, so the known distribution in Minnesota. So here is a nice picture of our emerald ash borer status map. That URL will be in the chat. This is something that the MDA updates nightly. It's of confirmed locations of emerald ash borer in the state. So it's not going to be like a 1-to-1 for trees, but that's why we have this generally infested area polygon that we put as a buffer around areas with confirmed reports. So it's right now, like I mentioned, we're at 60 counties with known emerald ash borer infestations. This map shows where the emerald ash borer quarantine boundaries are and where the known infested areas are. And so you can see Todd County is shaded in as a temporary quarantine. And essentially that just means it's right now it's under emergency quarantine, which limits the movement of any ash material in the emerald ash borer life stage, mulch or hardwood firewood. And it's the same rules as the formal quarantine. It's just that we're in the 45-day comment period. So once that comment period ends, it will be turned into a formal quarantine. What's important on this map too is that generally infested area. So if you are within one of those green polygons, a generally infested area, that means there's a high probability that emerald ash borer may be already infesting your ash trees, whether it's showing symptoms or not. Due to the cryptic nature of the insect, it's usually a couple years to see symptoms in a tree, and at that point it's already spread further beyond. So it's always impacting more trees than what's visible in an area. So we put this couple mile buffer around confirmed infested trees to help better show where emerald ash borer is impacting things. And in general, the rule of thumb, I'll get into treatment stuff more later for insecticides. But when you're within 10 miles of a known infested area, that's when you want to start considering treatments, and because it's beginning to impact and move into trees in your area. And so with this map too, you can see that Todd County was already somewhat surrounded. So we have infestations in the Little Falls area, but where it was found in the county was right there, the city of Bertram, and just to the south there along Highway 28. It was also found right near the border at the Birch Lake State Forest area. And there was a previously known infestation nearby in Sauk Center. And then recently last year, it was found just on the northern edge of the county in Wadena, Minnesota, and Deer Creek in Ottertail County. So it's been kind of moving into the area. And so the first confirmed find we had was in that southeastern corner of Todd County, but is likely beginning to impact trees in other parts of the county as well. So something that you'll need to prepare to deal with going forward. Just to zoom in to where the infestation that was found, it was, like I mentioned, along Highway 28, city of Bertram, and south of there, about 5 miles north of the county border. And so, yeah, that's where it was found. You're likely to see more places pop up. And if you think you have signs of emerald ash borer in your ash tree and you're located in another place of Todd County, please report that to the Department of Ag. I will provide the way to report at the end of this presentation. But we want those reports so we can follow up on it and make this map as accurate as possible for people that are depending on it to make choices. Whenever in doubt of where emerald ash borer has been found, if you think it's been found there or someone says it, please check this map. This is kind of what's known in the state. So it's the standard, and we want to know if people think they're seeing it outside of what's on here. All right, so now I'm going to touch on regulations for emerald ash borer. So we have quarantines in place. We have both an internal quarantine and an external quarantine. So, and the purpose of the quarantines are to reduce the spread of a pest through human-assisted movement. And so we're trying to restrict pest movement while still facilitating trade that people are doing. And and due to the nature of this insect, it can be in a cut pile of firewood for over a year after that wood was cut. So that's just it. There's many ways that it can easily be transported long distances by humans. Give an example of that. Emerald ash borer has now shown up in Colorado. It's shown up in Oregon and in Vancouver. These are long jumps from kind of the expanding western edge of infestation from kind of that core area in the Midwest. So you can see how far some of these types of wood products get transported that can spread harmful insects. So that's why we've had these campaigns of buy it where you're going to burn it. So you don't or buy certified firewood that's been heat treated, so you're not potentially moving pests to a new area. And so, like I mentioned, we have both an internal and an external quarantine. The external quarantine restricts movement of these regulated items into the state from Canada and neighboring states. And then we have the internal quarantine, so these county level quarantines that restricts movement of these regulated articles from quarantine areas to non-quarantine areas within the state. And so what is regulated? Regulated articles are any ash material, any stage of emerald ash borer, mulch, and all hardwood firewood. So any hardwood species of tree that's cut to lengths that are less than 4 feet in length. So that's because the average person cannot tell what type of wood is in a cut pile of firewood. And so just to kind of visualize what those regulated articles are, those ash logs, split or not split firewood, and mulch. So we do have, so basically what's allowed for the movement of these regulated articles, you can move freely outside of the quarantine. So you can see those green areas in northern Minnesota, and you can see those red areas. That means stop, don't move. So you cannot move any ash material or hardwood firewood that hasn't been treated out of Todd County into Douglas County. So that would be going from a quarantine area to a non-quarantine area, and that is not allowed unless you have a compliance agreement with the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. You cannot bring in any of those regulated articles from Canada or from North Dakota. You can go from a non-quarantine area to through a quarantine area to another non-quarantine area. That's called transiting. You just have to not do overnights, but you can move stuff from non-quarantine area through a quarantine area to back to a non-quarantine area. You can also move any of those items freely within the contiguous quarantine area, so which is pretty large area at this point. And then I have that green arrow. So you can move stuff freely into the quarantine area from out of state if you are bordering a quarantine area. So stuff from Wisconsin can come into the quarantine area, or stuff from Iowa can come in from the south into the quarantine area. That's just the gist of what's allowed for movements as far as the emerald ash borer quarantine goes. If you have questions on that, please reach out to me. I'm happy to answer any questions. If you think your business might be impacted or might need a compliance agreement to move something, just get in touch with me. I'm happy to figure out if that's needed for what you're doing. And so the types of treatment options we have for wood is chipping or grinding it. For mulch, if you're trying to move mulch out of the quarantine area, it just needs to be 1 inch by 1 inch in less than 2 dimensions. So if you have a tub grinder, that's typically what it takes to meet those specs. You can do debarking, complete removal of bark plus a 1/2 inch of sapwood to ensure that it's free of any potential emerald ash borer infestation. So there's compost that has to reach a certain temperature for a certain number of days. For firewood, we have a heat treatment certification program for firewood dealers. That basically requires having a kiln that heats the wood to a core temperature of 140 for at least 60 minutes. Currently, we have 15 certified firewood producers in the state that are selling firewood that is free to move throughout the entire state because they are certified pest-free. There's also the kiln drying option for lumber. That's lumber up to 3 inches max. Otherwise, it would take the heat treatment standard for firewood. Basically, you have to just reach a certain moisture content. And then you could also fumigate it if you're licensed. But those are basically the options. Compliance agreement options if you're looking to move any regulated articles outside of the emerald ash borer quarantine areas. And just a reminder, the definition of firewood, it's wood cut to lengths of less than 4 feet long, whether it's split or not, whether it's for commercial or private use, and it's all hardwood species. So if it's softwood, if it's something like pine, that's not something that we're regulating. And just a reminder, firewood cannot enter from Canada or other states. It cannot leave the emerald ash borer quarantine or the spongy moth quarantine in Lake and Cook counties, which is something that you folks in Todd County won't have to deal with right now. But firewood can move freely around inside of the pest quarantine. It can move freely around outside of the quarantine, and it can move freely throughout the entire state if you see that MDA certified safe to move logo. Here's my contact information again. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions or comments on the emerald ash borer quarantine. or if you might need a compliance agreement or something like that, please feel free to reach out with any questions or comments. And just to drive this point home a little bit further, here's a piece of ash wood with no signs on the outer bark that there's anything wrong with the wood. Peel off that bark, you find that S-shaped tunneling gallery, but still you see no insect. Well, it's that jade larva that's about a 1/4 inch into the sapwood that's waiting there to pupate and turn to the adult beetle and start an infestation in a new location. So this is why we've been harping on not moving firewood long distances and buy where you're going to burn it. So just really try to drive that message home. With emerald ash borer being emerged over a year after that wood was cut, it's kind of like a time bomb. If you bring it to a new location and you don't burn all the wood, could potentially emerge there and start damaging trees. All right, so management. What are your options for dealing with this insect? So like I mentioned, I'm going to kind of give your options for dealing with that, kind of, in a managed landscape area, so in communities, in your yard. There are other resources if you are a woodland owner. The DNR Forest Stewardship Program has resources available for cost share or expertise if you're trying to manage a large tract of ash forest, and can help out with guidelines for that. But in general, our best management practices for emerald ash borer: try to avoid removing ash trees, pruning ash trees, and whatnot when that adult beetle is active. So we consider the active period from May 1st through September 30th, just knowing that depending on where you're at in the state, the beetle can emerge earlier than other locations. So basically, that's the time frame when the adult beetles are actively emerging from trees and flying around and reinfesting new stuff. So try to avoid doing removals during that time period. If you have to, do a removal of ash trees during that time, try to, keep the wood where it is or not move it long distance, or chip it before it's brought to a new location, or at a minimum tarp it if it's in a vehicle, and tarp it so stuff isn't flying out potentially as you drive down the highway to where it's going to be processed. Ideal time to do work on ash trees is between October 1st and April 30th, when the adult beetles are inactive and it's in a dormant period. This way, any emerald ash borer during that summertime had the chance to reinfest the same tree that was in, so you can take out more of that population by waiting until the fall or winter to do that. And then you have more time to deal with the wood and potentially destroy it before you get to the next flight season and have stuff emerge from it. So if you can, wait till fall to haul and do any of that work in ash. As emerald ash borer becomes kind of blows up in an area and you reach that point where there's kind of widespread tree mortality, there may come a time where you need to do more work during that summer period just to deal with hazard trees. But early on, it's important to try to reduce the amount of work being done in the summer and do that in the fall and winter time. All right, so you really have a couple of options for dealing with this insect. You can either remove trees or you can treat them with insecticide. So those removals, where you can think about it, if you have poor condition trees, poorly sited trees, so in a poor location, those are something that you could plan to do removals of before emerald ash borer is potentially found in your community. Start reducing the amount of ash that you have on the landscape just to help spread out those costs of dealing with the insect over a longer period of time. You're not going to stop the insect from arriving and eventually working its way through the ash resource, but if you can spread out that damage between a longer period of time, that can be much easier on your pocketbook instead of dealing with a lot of dead trees within a short period of time. Other things you can do, you can target trees that are showing signs of woodpecker damage. Trees with that woodpecker damage are going to have more emerald ash borer in it than a tree next to it that's showing no signs. And then you're dealing with dead trees. So as trees die, you need to get them off the landscape because they do become hazardous and if they're located in a place where they can fall on a home or a neighbor's fence or things like that, or potentially someone you want to deal with them as quickly as possible. Now, for insecticide treatments, those can be done before emerald ash borer is found in an area. Like I mentioned, once you're within about 10 miles of a no infestation, that's when you want to think about starting to treat trees. If you have high value trees you don't want to lose. Or you can also start treating trees after they're lightly infested with emerald ash borer. I have a graphic that'll kind of show what that looks like. But basically, if you have a tree with at least 70% of a healthy canopy or more, it is a good candidate for treatment. It's healthy enough to uptake the chemical and protect the tree. I will just remind you that treatments aren't a one and done thing. They have to be reapplied every year or every other year, depending on the chemical that's being used. So they're not right for every situation. If you're a community managing a large number of trees in the right of way, you may want to use insecticide treatments just to slow the rate at which you lose trees and gives you an opportunity to remove them on your own schedule. So you might not treat the tree for the life of the tree, but you will treat it for a certain duration to help with staging those removals and replanting over a longer period of time. So some things you want to consider when you're thinking of removal or treatment, how close is emerald ash borer to me? Am I within 10 miles of a known infestation? How healthy is the tree? Is the tree in good condition? Is it a good candidate? Is it a large mature tree that's providing a lot of value? How many trees do we have to deal with? Is there a large number of trees? So these are all kind of questions you have to take into account when you're deciding on whether you want to do removal or treatment. In general, the treatments for the average homeowner, I think currently are around $12 a diameter inch. That can be less in certain areas. It kind of really depends. Some communities will contract their treatment of public trees with a company and then provide that discounted rate to residents. That's an option you can pursue with companies providing treatment in your area. Something to think about. That way, people are having it properly applied and where those treated trees are on the landscape. There are also chemical options available from the local garden store that can be used to treat your tree as well. Just something you want to consider, these are systemic insecticides. They will affect adult beetles. So when a tree is treated, any adult beetles that feed on the leaves will get a dose of that chemical and be killed. But they will also affect any larvae that are still actively tunneling underneath the bark in that cambium layer. The insecticide will kill at that point too. So treating trees can protect untreated trees as well in the immediate area. So it does provide some benefit to those untreated trees. If you're trying to reduce populations in a neighborhood area, that can be an effective way to lengthen out the time it takes for the beetles to build up to tree killing levels in those untreated trees. So when you're looking at insecticide treatments, it's important to measure your tree and follow the label that's on whatever product you're using. The stuff that's available at your local garden store is typically the active ingredient is imidacloprid, which is a neonicotinoid and can affect pollinators. So you want to make sure you don't have a bunch of flowering plants at the base of your tree if you're treating it yourself. Typically, those are applied via soil drench method, and those have to be repeated every single year. What most tree care professionals use for large mature trees is the chemical emamectin benzoate. And so all this information is available in our homeowner guide to insecticide use and selection. But the most common treatment used for tree care professionals is that emamectin benzoate, and that's guaranteed for 2 years and is still somewhat effective in that third year as well. So if you're individual homeowner, you might want to stick to that 2-year schedule. If you're a city trying to manage a large number of trees, you could consider that 3-year treatment as you're dealing with a lot more trees, and a little bit of damage in that third year may not be that big of a deal. So we also really advise if your tree is over 15 inches in diameter at breast height, that you consider having if you're going to treat the tree, have it professionally treated. There's oftentimes the chemicals available to the average homeowner at your local store may not be rated for those size trees or larger. So, you know, we really encourage people, if you have a tree we're saving, to have it professionally treated. That way they can assess the health of the tree and make sure that it's worth the investment to treat it. And that way the chemicals injected directly into the tree, it's guaranteed for a couple of years, is highly effective. As long as your tree is healthy enough and the chemical is applied properly, it will be protected from emerald ash borer. And so here's like what I mentioned, as long as your tree has at least 70% of a healthy canopy or more, it is a good candidate for treatments. And so in this image, you can see on the left, that's a good condition tree. It has no more than 10% canopy decline. That tree in the middle is still treatable. There's between 10 and 30% decline of that canopy. And then that tree on the right, the canopy decline is too far gone. That is not a good candidate for treatment. There's already enough damage that has accrued from larvae tunneling underneath the bark to where that chemical won't get fully distributed throughout the tree and protect it. All right, and so just a reminder, management priorities are going to change as emerald ash borer progresses through an area. So when you're in an uninfested area, the most important thing is detecting it early and reporting infestations, and doing things like planning an inventory, coming up with a management plan, or if you're a community that, you know, having an inventory of what's in the public right of way. It's hard to come up with a management plan if you don't know what you have as far as ash goes. So that is one of the more important things you can do. As you become an infested area, you want to treat high value trees. You want to keep up on sanitation. So doing those removals each year, taking out the trees that will become hazardous as they die, and try to stay on top of that. And then once emerald ash borer really kicks into high gear and you're seeing kind of widespread tree mortality, you just want to kind of minimize the movement of wood to out of those areas and just kind of dispose of it and utilize it as much as you possibly can for firewood or lumber or things of that nature. So that's just kind of how things change as you go from uninfested to heavily infested. Some of the resources that I mentioned, if you are a forest woodland owner, there are some resources available to you. So the DNR Forest Stewardship Program provides access to cost share for forest management issues and projects. And they can also help point you in the right direction of maybe some silvicultural guidelines for planting, or if you want to do a pre-salvage harvest, if you have a lot of ash that you think you can get some timber value out of before emerald ash borer comes in and decimates it. They can help answer those questions and point you to other resources. Additionally, there's the DNR Urban and Community Forestry Program. They have resources, so they are the group that provides community forestry grants out to communities. Typically, those grants become available in the fall. The last round was last October, November is when those grants were out for proposal. And so that's the website you'd go to check that out. If you are looking for more information, you can use that forester contact map to get in touch with the forester for your region. Typically, those community forestry grants are up to $500,000 for a 2 or 3 year period, and you can do anything from a $10,000 grant to a several $100,000 grant, and they pay for things like tree removals and replacements. They can pay for you getting a consultant to come up with an inventory and a management plan. It's just sometimes they will be allowed to pay for insecticide treatments if you plan on treating in the long term, or even allow you to use money for financial assistance to private property owners that may have not be able to afford removals on their property, things like that. That's usually what those types of grants cover. And additionally, there are some U of M extension resources. They have guidelines for managing ash woodlands with emerald ash borer, and they have guidelines for replacement trees depending on what type of forest you are. I encourage you to visit the U of M extension website for more information on what they have for managing ash woodlands. All right, lastly, I have reporting. So if you think you found emerald ash borer and you want more information, please take a picture and get in contact with us. So really like take a picture of the damage that you're seeing that makes you think it's emerald ash borer, as best to your ability. I know sometimes that woodpecker damage is up in the canopy of the tree. It's hard to get a good clear picture, but try to get a picture of that and a clear picture of the damage you're seeing or the insect, and send it to us with a specific location and contact for follow-up. We have our Report a Pest online form, our email or voicemail that you can use for reporting a potential infestation. And please contact us with reports. We're happy to follow up on them and help figure out if that is indeed what's impacting your trees. So like I mentioned, yeah, please try to take clear pictures. That's really the most effective way for us being able to figure out what's going on. And in general, when it comes to emerald ash borer, there usually isn't just one ash tree in an area showing symptoms. So if you're struggling with like, I'm not sure if this tree is suspect or not, look at other ash trees in the immediate area and see if they are showing any signs of that, that woodpecker damage or bark splits or canopy thinning and things. So try to use those context clues of other adjacent trees around you to see if it might be impacting your trees as well if you're having any questions. But like I mentioned, please report to us if you think you found emerald ash borer. Want to know about it. We want to, as accurately as possible, map what's going on throughout the state. So yeah, report a pest, report it to us. Or if you're tech savvy, feel free to download the EdMaps app on your smartphone, and you can report emerald ash borer that way as well. All right, so that about does it. Here again is my contact information. I'm happy to take any questions that you might have. Just a reminder that this has been recorded, and I will make it available on MDA's YouTube page within the next couple of days. And yeah, thank you for coming to the meeting, and happy to answer any questions. All right, question from Nancy. Will there be anyone contacting wood businesses in Todd County? If you have specific businesses in mind, please reach out to me and we can talk about that, because I can get in touch with folks, make sure they're aware of the new regulations that are now in place for the movement to wood. Yeah, Nancy, we can talk about that more. But I don't have a list of specific businesses. So if you do, please let me know. All right. Yes, Amish sawmills. So yeah, that can present issues, and I will look into some of the outreach that we can do. Any other questions on emerald ash borer? All right. Well, if there are no other questions, we will end this. And like I mentioned, this has been recorded. Please, if you have questions that you think of after this, feel free to shoot me an email or give me a call. Happy to answer it. So thank you for coming to the meeting, and have a good rest of your day.